Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the June 2020 Regional Housing Forum. This is our first fully virtual event, and we find ourselves in a time and a place that no one expected. Usually we get together at St. Luke's, and I know historically it's been important before the meeting and after the meeting for us to get together in small groups. We won't be able to do that today, but we are together. And I think we have a very good forum. Our goal today is really to bring everybody up to date on a number of issues. And I know we're all asking, where are we? Just as a chorus of voices has begun to move the needle on new resources for affordable housing in our region, and we were very close, the COVID-19 pandemic has blurred our momentum. Unlike the housing and financial crisis that became the Great Recession, this situation unfolded very quickly. And we asked, will recovery come as quickly? And will housing credit markets be reacting quickly? What will this mean to developments underway and those seeking capital? What will the post-coronavirus environment look like for affordable housing movement? Will there be an unexpected opportunity to establish policies designed to produce more equitable results for low-income households? And what of this moment we find ourselves in today? Matters of social justice, equity, police violence, and creating a long overdue national conversation, and one that must surely continue and lead to systemic change. We believe Black lives matter. That belief should be represented in our words and our deeds. And I would propose that it begin with affordable housing. Today, we're going to focus on one piece of this complicated set of issues, housing affordability. And without further ado, let me give you a breakdown of what we're going to do today. This is a different format and a shorter format. We usually have meetings for almost 3 hours. Today, we're going to be together for an hour and a half. Given the issues related to COVID-19 and its impact on all facets of business, we want to better understand what this means to current and future efforts to preserve and create housing affordability. We have decided to take the pulse of many corners of the housing sector. Today, we will speak to experts in 3 different clusters. Those will not be extensive conversations, as we have a dozen people that we want to hear from. In our first cluster, we'll hear about the urgent actions and policy that needs to be considered to protect the most vulnerable among us. In our second cluster, we'll hear from developers and owners of affordable housing to better understand what's happening on the ground. How are low-income renters, especially seniors, being supported during the crisis? How will the economic environment impact planned development? In our third cluster, we'll speak to state and local jurisdiction officials to hear about responses to the crisis. And we'll hear from those in the finance sector and philanthropy as we discuss the resources needed in the immediate term and in the near and the long term. And we'll close out the forum with a wrap-up conversation with Megan Shannon-Vikovic from Enterprise Community Partners and Frank Fernandez from the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation and with House ATL. So if everybody's ready, let's get started. Let me first welcome our first guest and someone we've heard from before, Michael Lewis, Deputy Director with the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. Michael, your organization works with those struggling with evictions. What can you tell us about COVID-19 is impacting an already troubled area for low-income renters? Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Bill. In the little time I have, I'm going to try to answer that by sharing a little about the emergency assistance response and what is going on in our eviction courts, and leave some of the policy issues to experts like Bambi on our panel, just to give you a sense of the emergency assistance response and need, and I'm just going to focus on ABLF's work because although we are not the only one, we're instructive, and that's where I have the best numbers. We really saw the need and the requests hit on May 1st, and between May 1st and June 1st, just as one organization, we gave out $300,000 worth of COVID-related emergency rental assistance to about 300 families. So the average was about $1,000. It took an amazing lift where we expanded our team for that by adding 2 staff during this time, working closely with Columbia and Integral and others so that a new form of payment and by electronically could be accepted. And that was a huge shift for us. And there's other organizations that took on that work as well. But to put that in context of the need, let me pivot to what we're seeing just in the Fulton County courts, because I think it's also instructive. As of this morning, and I know there's updated numbers being put on the court's website periodically, there's about a 2,000 eviction backlog just to start being heard on June 22nd when the court is going to open and start doing mediations. And because of social distancing, they are going to implement a system where mediations happen during that week, and there'll be 100 mediations during that week to start to get through, and then proceedings will happen. So you look at that huge lift that we did in emergency assistance, and others have done the same, but it's still just scratching the surface for the need out there. And also it was addressing the unpaid rent up through sometime in May. So here we have June coming, July coming. There's issues in the court, no matter the best planning, they're going to be difficult around taking temperature as the Fulton County Courthouse plans when people come in, and if they have symptoms, what happens? Does it get adequately communicated so that they don't miss their hearing when they're not lit in? There is going to be, despite the best planning, a flood, some amount of chaos, and an incredible, overwhelming need for more emergency assistance in the community. If it's a one silver lining to the backlog is, let's think about the delay. Any evictions that are filed now will be in a line behind 2,000 in a backlog. And so I think that gives us a window as a community to answer the call that there's more response needed, more emergency assistance needed. The city has stepped up in giving out funds dedicated to rental assistance. But if those don't kind of hit the streets until July, we may already have a problem on our hand from the filings that happened in June. So just can't overstate the overwhelming response of the philanthropic community in the city has been amazing. But I'd be remiss if I didn't add that there's so much more that needs to be done. This is unprecedented. And given our times, and I know I'm short on time, but I think it's important to say that there are few places where the results, the impact, the vestiges of systemic racism, past and present, are starker than in our Fulton County eviction court. Just visibly go there, see it at a regular time. That's going to be exponentially more the case now. And so I think in a very real way, our response to this is an issue of racial equity. So just want everybody to take that to heart as well.
And I wondered, Michael, I know Congress is still considering additional emergency funds and extended unemployment. Is there a state legislative remedy to provide for the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures and resources to allow people to catch up once the recovery commences?
Well, so I'm going to punt out of respect because Bambi, who I think is on my panel too, is really the expert there. But I will take that as a chance to say, whether it's those funds or any others, one thing that's really important is it's not only about that pool of funds, but the capacity to get those out there in a timely fashion. One of the things that we were really prioritizing at House ATL leading into this was some real strengthening of that ecosystem for getting emergency assistance out, both to the providers, but also coordination of it. And we had some really great plans in place. As the great philosopher Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan to get punched in the face. But we're seeing that now. It's magnifying the need that it's not only those funds to get out directly to tenants, but there's some real infrastructure needs for those organizations. Organizations that serve immigrants have real capacity issues to get that out, for example. That needs to be paid attention to as funds come down.
Thank you, Michael. And we're going to have you rejoin us in a few minutes for a Q&A. Bambi, Welcome, Bambi Hayes Brown. Michael has set you up with your first question. You just heard Michael talk about the impact of evictions during a pandemic. I know that your work is somewhat limited to Atlanta, but you're a model for the whole state. What can you tell us about the rental assistance, tenants' rights issues, and policy matters that are happening more broadly throughout the region and the state? Welcome, Bambi.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Michael. We've worked very closely together because Georgia Act has even stepped into the arena where we previously did not do direct services, that the pandemic has really pulled the covers off of the affordable housing challenges, not only in Atlanta and Fulton County, but Metro Atlanta and the entire state of Georgia. So we have also received funds for rental assistance. Thank you to United Way and the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta, and also to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, who has allowed us to awarded us some funds to do some work statewide on these issues. But there was over 160 agencies, organizations, church groups, and individuals, Georgia Appleseed, Georgia Act, AVLF, and numerous other organizations came together and asked the governor for a moratorium on evictions statewide. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And we saw an influx of, even though the courts were closed, landlords were still filing evictions. We saw that in Metro Atlanta, in Atlanta, throughout the entire state of Georgia. We've also looked at efforts of utility moratoriums, and thank you to Georgia Power. They did implement that, and others who are under the Public Service Commission. However, on tomorrow morning at 9:30, the Public Service Commission will be having a hearing, and they will be discussing if they will end the moratorium on utility shutoffs. And so we have on Georgia Acts on our Facebook page the 2 emails where people can contact those members of the Public Service Commission so that they can actually perform a hearing. And one other thing statewide that we're seeing, we are partnering with a couple of other organizations to really work with our judges. And as Michael said, I'm a former property manager and a licensed real estate broker. If you have never been into the eviction court in Fulton County, I always tell everyone, you need to go. You need to go and see it for yourself. Because it is absolutely unbelievable. But we're working with a municipality, and it's led by judges, which is a little different. So it's not led by the advocates, it's led by the judges to look at innovative ways of deploying the rental assistance, working with landlords and tenants, having landlords and tenants actually talk to each other to end that backlog, because there has been in one particular county, unfortunately I can't name the county, they have a backlog of 1,500. And through our national partners, we've been hearing that some landlords are doing preemptive eviction filings on their guess that their tenant won't be able to make June or July's rent. We have not heard those cases in Georgia, but it is something that we are definitely looking at. And I'll give you one other quick example about even how judges can make a difference. When I was a property manager down in South Central Georgia, in Turner County, Georgia, one of the magistrate court judges said that, I'm not gonna hear an eviction proceeding until I know that the landlord has done everything in their power to work with the tenant, and they have to prove it and document it before he would even entertain a hearing. And so things like that really get the landlords and the tenants talking, and hopefully can resolve the situation, because we have to look at this, that a lot of our small mom and pop landlords, they're losing money too, and they had use that income to survive. That was their income. So we have to look at this on both sides of the fence.
So Bambi, would you say, because you mentioned a number of groups, would you say there's greater collaboration today, that we're working together, including with judges, than we have in the past?
Yes, most definitely. My example in Turner County, that was back in 2017. And now we're here 2020, and due to COVID, it has really pulled the covers off of an issue that we as advocates and we who advocates for tenants' rights have been talking about for years. I know for me, I've been talking about it for 24 years throughout the state of Georgia. So yes, we're seeing a lot more collaboration than what we normally have seen in the past.
It's amazing you started that advocacy in middle school, Bambi, but we're glad you started early. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Michael, and we're in a unique time. Everything we are presenting today wants to move people to action. So everybody who's presenting, I'm asking the same question. Are there new policy opportunities for our listeners to focus on that would affect the area that you're working on?
Well, definitely on the Federal CARES Act, there was a 120-day federal eviction moratorium for people who have federally backed rental assistance units or mortgages. But what I'm seeing is that a lot of, especially those that have mortgages, I had one person who applied for rental assistance through us, had an FHA mortgage and was totally unaware of the 120-day moratorium where they can talk to their mortgage company and work out some type of forbearance or a loan modification. I had one in Southeast Georgia on the coast that had a USDA loan that had the same thing. So we got to keep in mind our HUD-approved housing counseling agencies. We have to advocate for more funding from them because the time that we need our HUD-approved housing counseling agencies, as well as our advocates, are now more than ever. And also support them and really advocate on the federal level for more money for our housing counseling agencies, because they're having to pivot and do their counseling via Zoom. And then you have all of those other stipulations that go along with that, with making sure that everything is secure through DocuSign and all of those things. And then also, again, on the federal level,
all right, I'm going to come back to you because I want to get Kathryn in the conversation and have us talk with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I now want to invite Kathryn Marchman, Executive Director of Partners for Home and our city's lead agency for homeless. Kathryn, you've done a fabulous job under incredible circumstances. You've heard Michael and Bambi talk about living very close to the margin and still others being evicted. What kind of impact in this crisis having on homelessness in our communities?
Thank you, Bill. It's definitely been a really incredible community-wide response with all of our partners at the table, both at the local and the state level, public and private as well. When the pandemic first hit, we rallied those partners together, and we have been laser focused on a few critical areas, including isolation, food insecurity, outreach and encampment coordination, transportation, and really arguably most important, testing. That effort was really kicked off through the testing initiative that was led by our Healthcare for the Homeless organization, Mercy Care. And we were fortunate to get a CDC dedicated deployment to the city of Atlanta, unlike many communities that are still struggling to get community-wide testing for individuals experiencing homelessness. And I'm really proud to share that to date, we've tested over 3,000 individuals experiencing homelessness. Our positive rate of COVID positive cases has remained very low at about 1.2%. We've arguably tested almost everyone in our system experiencing homelessness, prioritizing our congregate shelters as well as individuals who are unsheltered. And then concurrent to that work, we were able to stand up 2 hotels, one for isolation for individuals who are COVID positive, and that facility continues to operate. And then another non-congregate shelter that is operating out of a hotel with just under 240 individuals right now, prioritizing individuals who are unsheltered, who really otherwise, but for this facility, did not have a safe place to isolate. We have partnered with the Atlanta Community Food Bank and World Central Kitchen with some catering companies to deliver almost upwards of 1,500 meals per day to individuals who are unsheltered. And that work continues. We have ongoing outreach and encampment, education, and outreach to individuals who are unsheltered. And as I said, we are prioritizing those individuals for the non-congregate shelter. We have dedicated safe transport to get people to and from housing and isolation. And then we're going to have ongoing testing that will continue beyond what's been done to date. And that work will be led by Mercy Care.
And Kathryn, when you say you stand up hotels, that means you have leased hotels and you're using them for this purpose. That's correct?
That's correct. So we have a couple partnerships, one with the State Department of Public Health and one with the City of Atlanta, where those respected municipalities are leasing the facility or renting the facility. And then we are partnering with Gateway 24/7 Center to provide the staffing for those facilities and providing some of the overall administration and support there.
And one of the things I'm hearing, you know, both from Michael and Bambi and you, there is a real spirit of collaboration. You've got new partners at the table and a new urgency in your area. Is that true?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good. All right. I want to bring back Michael and Bambi into the conversation. And really the question for all of us is, what are the most important actions that need to be taken in this moment? Everything is, all of us listening today, you know, are looking at what can we do? So for Michael or Bambi, Kathryn, quickly, what's the most important action we can take?
Yeah, I would say in homelessness now that we have individuals in shelter and isolation, we are now laser focused on getting individuals who are homeless into housing. So that has never been more critical than it is now. And our single biggest need is landlords and units in the city of Atlanta and landlords who will take vouchers and subsidies in the city of Atlanta. And the issue of race and equity is also never more important than it is now as it relates to discrimination among individuals who are coming to rent units with a voucher or subsidy, and the stigma and stereotypes and frankly racism that comes with an individual with a choice voucher. So we need landlords to reconsider their position on taking individuals with subsidies and vouchers. We need a minimum of 300 units in the next 30 days to get people permanently housed. And then we also need landlords who will lower barriers to entry. We need landlords to reconsider their position on denying people with criminal backgrounds, recognizing that structural racism in our system and in our communities are leading to the criminalization of Black people and low-income people. And if we continue to refuse people with criminal backgrounds, homelessness in our community is going to get exponentially worse.
Exactly.
So that's our
Let me get
issue.
Michael. Michael, does this align with your experience?
I mean, absolutely. So let me echo all that. And then another piece of it that I think is important is around emergency assistance, both for tenants and, as Bambi pointed out, landlords who are struggling now. This is going to go on for a long time before the courts can process all of these. So we have the opportunity, but both from private philanthropy to make sure we have that money yesterday, because a lot of organizations are like AVLFs. We have run out, and now June's rent is due for folks. The city getting that money out to us as fast as possible. And then it's not just going to stop there. That for me is the call to action, and echo everything Kathryn said about this is a racial equity issue, including who those funds go to and capacity building so that those organizations can get those funds.
Excellent. And Bambi, would you add anything to this list?
Yes, I would. I would like to ditto everything, everything that was said before. But also, we really need to get the HEROES Act passed. It's going to take at least $100 billion in rental assistance to begin to make a dent in the impact that it has going forward. And as a former employee of the DeKalb Housing Authority, I was in the Section 8 manager, now called Housing Choice, for 8 years. Not only is this a racial equity, but it's also classism. So when you're talking about Black, and then if you're counting that if you're poor and Black, you really have a lot of issues. So not only educating landlords and getting landlords to accept these housing choice vouchers, but also getting communities to understand. Because as a real estate broker, I see it all the time in advertisements, no Section 8 allowed, as well as people in communities, even people that look like me, in Black and brown communities, say that they don't want a housing choice voucher person in their neighborhood because it's going to bring their property values down.
So Bambi, tell me that number
mindset.
again. Tell me that number again. We need what?
$100 billion.
Okay, don't ever accuse Bambi of thinking small.
No.
All right,
And we
this
need
is what
all
we
of
need.
it.
I want to
Yes.
thank all three of you. I know we could talk much longer on this area, but we've got a lot of folks to talk to. Thank you, Kathryn and Michael and Bambi, for your work every day.
Thank you.
Okay, let's pivot now to the developers and operators of affordable housing. It's kind of where the rubber hits the road. My first guest is Margie Stagmeyer, someone that we know well at the Housing Forum. She's managing partner of TriStar Real Estate Development. Margie, your company invests not only in the development of real estate, but also the operation of wraparound services that have met the needs of residents. How is this crisis impacting your work?
Thank you, Bill. What's been really interesting is housing serves so many more needs than just housing people, especially with this COVID crisis. You got to remember that overnight, apartments and housing became classrooms. So one of the first things we noticed is when they basically closed the schools and started virtual learning, the first thing that hit us was the digital divide. The average household income in our apartments is $26,000 a year. We only found out of one particular property, only 2 families had a laptop basically where they could plug in. So we worked with APS to make sure all our families and all our children in our after school programs had access to online learning. And our principal told us that even with the computers, about 65% participated. So we are actually—
Let me ask Margie, in the region, do you know other school systems that are taking that action?
Oh yes, I think all of them pretty much are.
Okay.
Which I mean, just kudos to all the public school systems and especially Atlanta public school systems. I think they've actually their response has been amazing. So we've been dealing with the digital divide. Also, of course, children get many of their meals from school. So the other thing, we've been working with the Atlanta Food Bank and Atlanta Public Schools to make sure we had a feeding program. And we just started our summer feeding program at all our properties about 2 weeks ago. The third thing I want to mention is something you don't think about, but a lot of our tenants are seeing about a 20% increase in their utility bills. Again, because their children are home during the day and they're home during the day. So, their utility bills are becoming a little bit more expensive. So there's a lot that our families are dealing with. And we've really tried to step up through Star C and our wraparound services to really help them during these times.
You're really speaking to the fact, and we often make this point at the Housing Forum, is that everything's connected to everything else, isn't it? Right? We hadn't been focused on the digital divide, or it's been talked about, but really not acted on. Now it's critical. And it's critical to where we live, where access to schools, and our ability to continue to learn. In your area, what actions need to be taken?
Well, one of the things we did about a year ago is we started an eviction lab to study eviction, because our families are so vulnerable. I mean, just if they had their hours cut, they couldn't pay rent. And we really want to strive to have no evictions in our portfolio. So we started the eviction lab. And of course, with everything that's going on now, a lot of our tenants were laid off or had to stay home because they didn't have childcare. So we made that formal. Our board, Star C board, voted for the eviction relief fund in March. And we've raised quite a bit of money. And we are basically doing a matching scholarship to help families pay their rent. We've expanded the program to any landlord that has rents at 80% AMI and has a property near a low performing school, which is basically every apartment community south of I-20, west of the city, and a lot east of the city. As of today, we have 32 properties signed up. and representing about 6,000 units. And we've started taking applications and we're seeing it grow. Again, it's a matching grant where the landlord has to pay 10% and waive all fees. The tenants pay between 20 and 50% depending on the grant that we got. And then the Star C pays the remainder.
And one of the great things, Margie, you've done over the last 5 years is proven the theory that if we provide safe, decent, affordable housing for people and have wraparound services, grades go up.
Yes.
Kids are more nurtured. We have greater accomplishment in the neighborhood. So I want to thank you for that, and we'll come back to you. My next guest is James Alexander, president of Mercy Housing Southeast, one of the great housing developers in our community in the Southeast. James, Mercy is known for its development and its resident services. What impact is COVID having on your work, and how is Mercy responding? Thanks for being here, James.
Thank you, and good morning. COVID is definitely having an impact on our work. There's a significant number of job losses, as Margie just mentioned, within our community across the metro area and also across the country. I don't believe that job losses will significantly impact the ability to finance affordable housing moving forward. I think we know that bank lending to developments is really dependent on a pool of residents who are employed and can pay at rates that are below market rent. And while there is an outflow from that pool due to job losses and wage losses, there's unfortunately also an inflow from that pool from higher income individuals who are having wage loss. I'd also add that for many affordable housing properties, there's some form of wait list. So the need is there and the supply is really lacking. Lenders are really examining developments more cautiously and expecting slightly reduced rents. But really those fundamentals are still there for affordable housing developments to move forward. I think the bigger issue caused by COVID is a couple of things. One, reductions in equity from the low-income housing tax credit, and two, reductions in grant-like money from municipalities. If you look at about an 80-unit deal for the amount of reduced equity that we would expect to come in as a result of the downturn in the economy, it can create a $1 to $2 million gap in affordable housing development that must be made up somewhere. And I think the other thing is just that, when we look at municipalities in the region and across the Southeast, there are really fewer dollars for affordable housing development in terms of local grants due to local municipal funding gaps. And I think we'll hear more about that later. I think, much like TriStar, we also do focus on resident services, and our response has been similar to some of the organizations that you've seen today. We've really focused on food insecurity and really providing food goods to over 1,000 residents and properties. We've made contact with over 1,300 seniors in particular, who we call to really try to reduce the amount of social isolation that seniors are feeling during this time.
Let me ask James, even before the pandemic and before the appropriate focus on equity and justice, we were challenged to produce more units. What's your biggest concern right now about that production? What are you guys at Mercy Housing concerned about and looking to?
I think, concerned about a couple things. One is financial commitments from local governments towards affordable housing when they have really tough budget choices to make as a result of COVID. So, developers who are producing affordable housing really rely on those public sources, local public sources of funding to make developments work. And with local municipal budget gaps, that definitely creates a challenge. I think the other thing I'd just like to say is, as it relates to racial equity and injustice, I think that, these are not new issues related to affordable housing and affordable housing development. I think that in particular, how we set up walls and barriers around communities through zoning is, really a coded form of racism across the region. And so I think that's going to continue to be a challenge of ours as we look for property to build affordable housing in areas where you don't see a lot of diversity. And that has been a challenge, and we really see it as an ongoing challenge for our organization going forward.
Thank you, James. And thank you for the work of Mercy Housing. I mean, we all key off of you guys, and you do such great work. Thanks for your leadership. We'll come back to you. Our last guest in this cluster is the president and CEO of Atlanta Habitat for Humanity, Lisa Gordon, one of our superstars in the community who has done such a great job. Lisa, your organization, indeed habitat organizations all across the globe, are impacted in multiple ways. Your model is built on volunteerism. And of course, we always think of Jimmy Carter out there nailing the nails in, but it takes thousands and hundreds of thousands of volunteers. Something we can do in the same manner, maybe something we can't do in the future that we've done in the past. So how is COVID-19 impacting your work, and how are you guys responding to it?
I think overall in the single family space, there was already a low inventory. And so that put a lot of pressure on affordable housing providers, as well as, cost for land and being able to develop. I think also the high unemployment is really has a tendency to impact our families and our work. And then our volunteer model, we get about $3 million in labor costs that offsets our housing cost. And that means we're able to build more houses. So right now, we are only using our staff to provide building the houses. And we just started that a few weeks ago after the shelter in place was lifted. And so for us, it's really a threefold impact. One, it's our homeowners being impacted. We heard from over 100 homeowners in the first 30 days, and we have a mortgage relief fund, and we're actually helping about 68 homeowners for 1 to 3 months with mortgage payments. Then the second point is the volunteers, as I spoke, for labor. So if we add subcontractors, that adds about $30,000 to $40,000 in cost for us. And then the third issue is fiscal funding. A lot of our funders, I think it's been the corporate, we're going to handle the emergency. So we've gotten letters that said, because of COVID, we're going to shift our funding to emergency. So if all of our funders do that, we literally would not have any resources to build our program. And we're seeing a pretty significant shift. And then some corporations with corporate responsibility, it's about getting their volunteers out there. So they're like, well, we'll build with you next year. So our real concern is without the volunteer model to offset our costs and subsidy, as well as corporate and foundation response has been either it's emergency relief or we'll defer action. It really could impact our program and the sustainability that we provide. We are a safety net. So we're the one organization, I think, that helps our families get out of poverty, stay out of poverty, and help that next generation build wealth. So I'm really concerned. Around the country, Habitats have had to furlough employees, close their operations, and stop building because of those issues. So very, very concerned about the long-term impact, especially when we're not seen as emergency. And I can't compete with the other folks that we're talking about evictions that is real and in front of us and systemic and at very large numbers. So very, very concerned about long-term sustainability while everybody focuses on emergency. Do we lose that safety net?
Well, and that's exactly what we're talking about today, isn't it? Both cases. Of course, we got to respond to the emergency, but we've also got to have a long-term strategy. Let me ask you a question I asked earlier. Are you finding greater collaboration with your counterparts and in the public-private sector?
I think we have a number of people that have raised their hands. So I would say we started a mortgage relief fund and in 30 days raised more than $100,000. So to me, that partnership was people realizing that they do need to provide for the long-term sustainability of our homeowners who have really worked really hard. And they have faced all the barriers that the other speakers have talked about, the racial inequity, the lack of access and opportunity. And also in our communities, we have been given a hard time where people are saying, well, we don't want habitat. We already are an affordable community. So we've faced all of those barriers. So just imagine that person who's overcome all those barriers, has their home, has some stability, and now through COVID loses their job and their ability to make their mortgage is in jeopardy. And even for Habitat, if we defer their mortgage or do some type of support to them, we can't pay their insurance or their taxes. And if you don't have either of those things, you can lose your property very quickly.
Exactly. Let me ask James and Margie to kind of come back in the picture. And you know, there's a great Albert Einstein quote. And of course, smartest guy in the world, we all give him credit for these things, but this is really one of his. In the midst of every crisis lies an opportunity. So the question for the three of you is, where do you see the opportunity? A new focus on race, equity, and justice? Can we bring that into the housing space? Where do you see the opportunities? Lisa?
I actually see that that is the central issue to the work that we're doing in affordable housing, because it's really about access and opportunity. Our program provides mortgages to people at 30 to 50% of AMI, and that's normally somebody that's making between $26,000 to $32,000 annually, and it is 80% African American female-headed households. So I think race and equity is already in this conversation in my mind. It's what can we do to break down the barriers, and what can we do to be innovative, and what can we do to get subsidy and funding? I'm hearing great statements about everyone's concern, but I'm seeing the need for more action.
Exactly. James or Margie, anything to add?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think.
Go ahead, Margie.
Well, I don't think evictions are going to go away anytime soon. So to us, it's an opportunity to bring the issue to the forefront. We started this eviction relief fund, and we hope to go out of business one day, but we see it growing over time past the COVID-19 issue.
James?
I think that the COVID crisis has really created a moment where most people in the housing industry are really focused on stability of residents and emergency rental assistance. And I think historically there's been some division within folks who have been concerned about affordable housing around the importance of emergency rental assistance. And I think it's really brought people together related to that. I do think that, this does provide an opportunity for us in the field to really name some of the stuff that we're seeing, and to be able to have more frank conversations about it. I talked about zoning, and frankly, in many places, that's just a form of racism and keeping Black and brown people out of communities. And
exactly.
So
and
I think if we can have more frank conversations, I think it's an opportunity to have more frank conversations about it.
Exactly. And do we see home builders or the apartment association or other associations, you know, on both sides, for profit, not for profit? Is that conversation beginning there? Or are you guys in communication with each other?
I'll just speak since I'm chair of ULI Atlanta, myself and Sarah Kirsch, which everyone knows very well from House ATL. Sarah and I, before the COVID response happened, we're having conversations about diversity, inclusion, and how we can address those issues in ULI, and which historically hasn't been an organization that has just frankly been that diverse. That's just a fact. And we had those conversations, which I was glad we had those conversations in advance, because with the crisis, you know, there's been some outcry from different groups saying, hey, what are we going to do? And we have even raised the issue to the national ULI from our chapter, saying, hey, we need to be more proactive. So we're beginning to have those conversations, and we're having some meetings coming up to discuss, you know, what are our next steps and what can we do that's meaningful. I personally just don't like to do and say things for the sake of doing them and saying them. I want to see meaningful change, and I want to see change on the ground. And that's kind of the space I come from. Not a big talker. I'm not going to send out a lot of statements, but I'm going to get the work done on the ground. And I think I challenge others to do that. Let's move the talk to action, and let's move the talk to meaningful change. And in certain organizations, like ULI Atlanta, this is the beginning of the conversation. So we're not going to go from, you know, a beginning conversation to a PhD in terms of our types of actions, but we got to be taking steps in the right direction, and we have to be in it for the long term with some patience.
Thank you. And you certainly have a track record of that. Lisa. Margie, any last words until I move on to the next group?
No, I pretty much agree with what everyone's saying.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you all. God bless you all. You guys are on the ground trying to develop the housing, and all of us are trying to support you. We're running just a few minutes behind, but we're doing pretty good. So I want to thank everybody so far. Now let's move to the last cluster of presenters. We're going to tackle the question of response resources. And we're going to do that with two groups. First up, let's hear from the state and local jurisdictions. And then we'll hear from the finance sector and philanthropy, two different groups. Our first guest joins us from the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. He's a division director of housing assistance and a great friend, Dave Wisnut. Welcome, Dave. Your division is home to the state's assistance programs, and you're also received the CARES Act funding. You've gotten real popular in the last few months, hadn't you, David? Tell us what that means and how you are deploying those dollars to address the crisis. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. And yeah, I think we definitely have gotten more popular of late, for sure. But as most folks know, there have been significant appropriations under the CARES Act that have gone out nationally. We've got $5 billion has gone out for the Community Development Block Grant, $4 billion for the Emergency Solutions Grant, $65 million for the Housing for Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. And DCA has definitely gotten our fair share of that and are working now to distribute that. For ESG, which is Emergency Solutions Grant, we have been awarded $45 million. And just to kind of give you some perspective, DCA usual ESG allotment is around 4 million. So 45 million versus 4 million, a little bit of a difference. ESG basically is a program for homeless persons. It provides shelter and housing, services, case management for low-income persons who meet HUD's definition of homelessness or are at risk of becoming homeless. We have got about $4 million, a little over $4 million that is ready to go out of our doors now, and we anticipate continuing to spool that up and have more dollars flowing out. I did want to mention sort of the allocation for that. 40% of our money is slated to go for rental assistance and prevention. And as we know, a lot of families will be homeless if they are evicted. And obviously, when they're homeless, it's even harder to maintain employment or to find employment. So these funds can be used to pay rental arrears so that folks can keep their housing. 30% of the funds are going to be used to rapidly rehouse people experiencing homelessness. They'll be able to get into their own housing, have a lease in their name, and that money will support them for a period of months so that they can become stable, gain employment, and move ahead with their lives. 20% of the money will go towards hotel motel vouchers for homeless people who require immediate shelter. And it's also going to support traditional homeless shelters around the state. And the final 10% will go towards homeless outreach to find people who are experiencing homelessness and connect them to these services. And I think really one of the key takeaways here is the prioritization of prevention dollars for rental assistance. And again, we believe this is not going to be just an immediate problem, but a problem that is going to show itself over a period of time, months, if not years. And so we intend to kind of stagger the money as we go to meet the long-term needs. The second program where we're receiving CARES money is the Hopwa program, and we're getting about $562,000 there. And basically that for housing assistance, supportive services, case management for low-income people living with HIV and AIDS, many of whom are homeless. That money can be used for tenant-based rental assistance and also utility assistance, mortgage assistance, short-term rental. And finally, the biggest allocation that DCA is receiving, and this is out of my area, but that's approximately $60 million, the Community Development Block Grant. Historically, that has been used by DCA to support municipalities and to support infrastructure needs. CDBG guidance has been a little bit slower from HUD than the other programs, so we're still waiting right now for the final HUD guidance on the allowable uses of these funds and then the prioritization of those funds. But I can tell you that discussions I've heard around the building have centered on how this money can be used to really support the economic recovery in communities across Georgia. It's very flexible money. There are ways that it can be used to spur economic development, support small business, and some of the resources I've given is a mechanism through our blog and websites to kind of follow what the guidance on it is and what we're going to do with that money.
So let me ask David, kind of maybe the question of the day is, one thing I hear from you is we're here for the long haul and we've got a long vision. We're trying to spend our money. But how is race and equity showing up in the funds that you're distributing? Is that a factor? Is it something we're focused on? Is it something we could focus on in the future?
I think it's something that we are paying attention to and evaluating. We look at the effects of racism on service delivery and on availability of resources as part of the work that we do in the Balanced State Continuum of Care, which is under my division, which serves 152 counties. So we are looking at where these funds are going and who they are serving as part of our evaluation of how we distribute these funds. So I would say that it's very front and center for us to make sure the money is distributed equitably across Georgia and across different populations.
Well, I think I can speak for everybody listening in today that we hope that we get a sharp focus on that and a continued focus. I know we could talk forever, David, but I'm going to stop now and go to your website. Let me bring on our next guest, Michael Murphy. Again, somebody that we all know. He's Cobb County Board. He's with the Cobb County Board of Commissioners, and he's a special assistant to the board chairman. Golly, Michael, did you get all that 65 million in Cobb County? I guess they're dividing it up between us, but the question is, what are you doing in Cobb County? And how are you deciding where that money goes? And I think the second part of the question is, are you collaborating with or talking to other counties, to your counterparts? Thanks for being here, Michael.
Yes, good and good morning, and I'm very pleased and proud to be a part of this August panel. As Dave, I guess to kind of dovetail Dave's comment about the funding, it has been very encouraging to see that the funds are available, and I think have been used. A good block of money has been set aside and offered to our small businesses as grants, not loans, and also in the area of rental assistance and eviction diversion. Those are two key areas, and I'm just excited about the fact that I guess I'm just overly optimistic that I think that despite the pandemic, I think it has created an awareness, and I think it's moved key items to the forefront that is getting you well-deserved attention. And I hope to help that spur home ownership, which I think will be the long-lasting way to go, particularly for people who have been renting for a long time, and what they're paying, to be able to point out that, gosh, you really can afford a mortgage. The interest rates and everything are just ideally. I mean, this is the perfect storm. So I really see, from my perspective, blue skies and green lights ahead.
Wow, that's a great message, Michael. We know we have challenges, but we've got to be optimistic. Speak just a moment. You know, we don't live in a vacuum, so every county, I think every county that was over what, 500,000 or 750,000 got some of the CARES money. Is there coordination between the counties at all? We all join each other?
Right. Well, I'm not aware of that. I think Cobb has been really trying to make sure that it gives every segment of the county, particularly our bevy of nonprofits, the opportunity to be involved, to partake in the process. But as far as outreach to other counties, again, with the pandemic, which has cut down on the actual physical meetings, I don't see too much collaboration other than staying in touch as to what each one are doing. But I'm certainly always offering assistance where I can.
Well, that's exactly why I asked you that question, Michael, because that's your MO. But let's just make note for all of us, better cooperation and collaboration between counties get us better outcomes for our region.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. And our last jurisdictional representative is the City of Atlanta's Chief Housing Officer, and also no stranger to our gathering. Please welcome Terry Lee. Terry, well, you're showing up everywhere these days, and we appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Bill.
How is the City of Atlanta leveraging its CARES Act funding, and what are other measures underway that are responding to the crisis?
No, I think that's an excellent question. I think it's important to note that at the start of the pandemic, Mayor Bottoms immediately worked with the City Council to allocate about $7 million from our general fund to focus on addressing issues with homelessness, small business development, food services, and even emergency assistance. As we look at the CARES Act, the city's been fortunate to receive about $9.6 million from the original CARES Act, and that was through our ESG, Hopwa, and CDBG programs. Additionally, we've received $88 million in coronavirus relief funding. Of the $9.6 million from the block grant program, the great majority was allocated towards emergency rental assistance, homeless preparedness, as well as small business development. Specifically for CDBG, it was about a $4.2 million allocation, and we allocated about $1.7 million towards emergency rental assistance and eviction diversion activities. Those allocations have actually moved forward and should be moving towards the contract stage. City Council has approved them. Today at City Council, the Finance Executive Committee will vote on the allocations of the $88 million. I'm very proud of our city and our City Council, as well as our mayor, to say that 58% of that allocation is going towards homelessness, emergency rental assistance, eviction diversion, and small business development. The other remaining balances, of course, will go towards public health and addressing other needs under the that are allowed under the relief funding. For the money that's going towards emergency rental assistance and eviction diversion, it's about $22 million. We are prioritizing working with families at 60% of AMI. That's about $32,000 or less. We've been instructed that families have to have been impacted by COVID-19 as of March 27th. So anything that was impacted, any family that was impacted by March 27th could qualify for these funds. For the distribution of the dollars, the city is working to identify a program administrator. We released an RFP on last week, and those responses will be due this Friday so that we can immediately work to deploy the funding. I think if I could go back to something that Michael Lucas stated, that the response has been great, but it's important that we get the funds out on the street prior to July. July is when the tsunami would really hit. And so we need to make sure we have our families housed, continue to maintain housing for our families.
And it sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? But when we're talking about the tsunami coming of evictions that we might see, not enough.
It's a drop in the bucket. It's literally a drop in the bucket. We looked at some data with the Atlanta Regional Commission early on, and we identified that about 29,000 households here in the city of Atlanta could be impacted by COVID-19. And that's really based upon their current occupation, right? Retail, hotel workers, service workers. And we further identified of the 29,000, about 16,000 of those families make less than $50,000 a year. And so we estimate the need to be between 30 million to 60 million. And that's just to keep people housed. That doesn't even talk about the fact, to Lisa's point, that we have to look at it not just from an emergency situation, but also what is our long-term sustainable goal to ensure housing affordability.
So what we might call an action item.
Exactly.
Double the amount. And while we have you, something that we all worked on for the last 3 years, and you were a great champion of, is tell us about where we are with the bond. We were right on the cusp of getting a $200 million bond to be matched by private money. We were all excited, and then the coronavirus arrived. Where are we?
Yeah, absolutely. Literally a week. We were literally a week before from approval. Prior to the pandemic hitting. And I think just to give context, the Housing Opportunity Bond was first started back in 2007. And to date, the city's issued about $75 million. And what's really important is that it's a local funding source that's supported by the city's general fund. The debt service is 100% paid by the city's general fund. It has been a phenomenal tool. We've been able to leverage about $473 million in private funding and created well over 3,800 units of housing and provided housing assistance.
Say that again, because you're talking about leverage.
Yeah, $75 million has leveraged over $473 million in private funding. And that's been since 2007. We issued the first bond in 2007. The second tranche of the $75 million was issued in 2017. And that's important as well, because between 2007 and 2017, we hit the Great Recession. And so we were delayed in fulfilling the full commitment of the $75 million because of the budget constraints that the city faced during that time period. Unfortunately, that's where we are today. We are facing as a city about a $35 million to a $40 million budget deficit. The bond itself is not dead. It has just been delayed as we go through the budget crisis. And I think that's really important.
We're going to quote you on that one.
Please do.
Not dead. We're going to keep working on it.
Absolutely. We have no choice.
Thank you for your leadership, Terry.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for your unending energy and your commitment.
Thank you.
Let me pivot just for a moment to the private sector. My next guest is the president of Truist Bank Foundation, formerly of SunTrust Bank, our local bank, and someone who's been in banking and been an advocate for many, many years. Lynette Bell. Lynette, thank you for joining us. You've been in the industry for some time and have seen a lot in your days. How has the mortgage industry been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? And how do we move past this and continue to create home ownership opportunities?
Good morning. Thank you, Bill, for this opportunity. I will say that most financial institutions, as we look at the pandemic, and again, we talked to the CDC Foundation and Johns Hopkins as the pandemic came on shore in the US. And one of the things that they told us is it's going to have a long tail in the US. And so as we look at home ownership as one of those tenements of what's happening, is that, you know, purchase transactions are down for sure in the United States. And so banks are looking at this. Fannie Mae is actually predicting that purchases will be down 30 to 35% between the second and third quarter. They believe that as the pandemic gets some level of stabilization in the country, and hopefully we get a vaccine, that we'll see an uptick in purchase transactions. But I must say, rates today are at their lowest that I've ever seen in my lifetime. You can get a mortgage today at 3.25% to 3.4%. So the refinance market, conversely, is booming. Lenders are having a hard time keeping up with the demand to refinance homes at this time. And again, with COVID having a big impact on our economy, with, you know, job loss claims and high GDP and loan forbearances occurring, those clients and families that can afford to refinance are doing so, taking advantage of these very extremely low rates. And so one of the things I would say is that it's a tale of two cities, really, when you look at the mortgage transactions and home ownership and how do we create that affordability piece. I hope that when we get out of this swing of this pandemic and the economy starts to do some level setting rebounding, that purchases will come up, as Fannie Mae is predicting, in fourth quarter, as we kind of build our economy back and people go back into some level of normalcy.
Thank you. And, you know, we really ask you to wear two hats today. So I want to go ahead and ask you, kind of on the philanthropy side, how many grants will be allocated? What do we anticipate this year in the Atlanta area?
Yeah, as we came into Truist, we just closed the merger between SunTrust and BB&T on December 5th, 2019. We stood up the Truist Foundation as a new foundation entity, and a week later, pandemic happened. And so we pivoted really quickly and put money out there initially as part of what leadership wanted to get ahead of this. So we made a commitment in March of $25 million to invest in supporting pandemic around basic care and basic needs. And we focused on 5 key areas. We focused on youth. Again, I think a lot of the speakers today have talked about, because of the pandemic and the shuttering of school systems, we focused on youth, trying to provide grants to organizations that would provide that connectivity support that students needed, providing laptops and MiFi devices so that they can build the connectivity across their platform so school continues. The second piece of it was that we focused on small businesses, because we know that small businesses are the cornerstones of our country, and they are the vulnerable population. Based on some research that we've done, we realized that 54% of small businesses are in jeopardy of not reopening. And so we initiated this pandemic response and investment to support those small businesses. So in May, we announced another $25 million, kind of doubling down our investment for $50 million as it relates to the pandemic.
And this is a broader question you may not be able to answer, but Truist is really stepping up in so many ways. Are you seeing that kind of across the industry? I mean, we got many banks here in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think financial institutions have a double role to play. We clearly are the debt structure that people need to help our economies grow, to help our cities grow and thrive, like Atlanta. But on the opposite side of the fence, we also have to be part of the philanthropic resource for sustainment and solvency. Post-pandemic, we have seen banks really step up, financial service providers step up and provide investments in organizations and nonprofits to help build communities back. In Atlanta, we've committed a ton of investments around the pandemic so that we can see that sustainability. I've seen a lot of banks do the same. In our $50 million that we committed, we've supported grants to over 300 nonprofit organizations focused on solvency, sustainability, whether related to rental assistance, utility expenses, or food security. So banks are stepping up in a really major way to support our communities, because we know that in order for us to thrive, we have to have our communities thriving as well.
There you go. And I can hear Margie Stagmeyer, small business person, saying, if you could stand up a minority business to help these students get an internet connection, that's a win, win, win.
Yes.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Let me ask my next guest, Frank Fernandez, another person we know well, Senior Vice President with the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation and one of the co-leaders of Housing ATL. So Frank, thank you for your leadership in that regard. We're going to ask you both about the work of the Blank Foundation, but if you could speak to foundations in general. How have you been engaged on the housing issues in the last few years?
Sure. In terms of just starting with housing issues over the last few years, it's something that for us has been core. It is really was an outgrowth of our commitment to the West Side and what we were seeing as the growing need around affordability. And so over the last few years and helping with House ATL and other efforts, really trying to lift up this issue of affordability, and has been really clearly articulated over the last hour or so, it is a growing need that will become a bigger and bigger issue for us to address across the board in Atlanta and the metro area. So just a couple of things. I know we're kind of running tight on time, Bill, but the things that I would want to lift up from a philanthropic perspective that I'm seeing over the last, say, 2 months, I think are really important to kind of put out there is one, the need for philanthropy and foundations to coordinate better amongst themselves is something that has become very, very clear to me. And second, and I've been working with Terry on this, is that, and also the need and the importance of philanthropy to coordinate with the public sector, given all the public dollars that are coming down the pike, to really maximize and leverage, which you've emphasized over the last hour, leverage those dollars in good and strategic ways is something that I think we and other foundations are increasingly more and more focused on. I think the Community Foundation United Way Response and Recovery Fund is a good example of that, and we need to do more of that. So I'd lift that up. And then also in terms of what the Blank Foundation has been trying to do in partnership with House ATL in the city is really think through, as Terry alluded to, the city is really putting a lot of resources to housing affordability and rental assistance. But some of the things that I think are really important to note is that those federal dollars come with a lot of encumbrances. And so it can be used for great things, but there's certain things it can't do. And that's where philanthropy can really play a key role, is doing those things that the public dollars can't, so that we can really maximize those public dollars. And so whether that is helping to ensure and working with groups like AVLF that others are able to access dollars for populations that may not be eligible for public money, like undocumented populations, or helping with 211, or helping just get money out the door now. Private money can move more quickly while the procurement process unfolds. So for us, it's really thinking about how we as a foundation can work with other foundations to partner with the city and partner with counties to make that happen.
And I know as part of House ATL, one of the primary recommendations was the bond issue that we all worked on so hard. How are you going to keep a focus on that?
I think, as Terry said, it's on hold. It's not gone, and I think that's really, really important. And I think part of it is incumbent on us, all of us, to keep it front and center. We know that the city and other municipalities are going through some significant fiscal challenges over the next year or so. So we got to be mindful of that. But we have to keep the eye on the prize in terms of this housing affordability challenge that we've been grappling with and really lifting up over the last few years is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And the public sector and the private sector and the philanthropic sector need to keep pushing and not have it go to the wayside because of the current crisis.
So I want to invite all our guests here, Dave and Michael and Terry and Lynette, and we have Frank here. The question is, if you would say there's one action all of us listening in on should take, let me just go around, one action that you would recommend, what would it be? Terry?
We really have to be focused on, and I want to go back to what Kathryn said, looking at the immediate situation. Right now in Atlanta, we have landlords that are not taking Section 8 vouchers, and we have voucher capacity. And so I think in order to make sure that we keep people housed and provide new housing alternatives for folks that truly need it, we need to really work with that community and encourage them to take vouchers. We just have to. We also, if I can just add one more, we can't play it safe. This is a time, if any, that we need to address some of the policy issues under the state's Landlord Tenant Act. We have to create an environment where we have more of a more inclusive environment and truly address some of the racial equity issues when it comes to affordable housing.
You know, and that's why Terry's so good. She gets 2 answers for 1 question always. Michael, what would you say? 1 action.
Terry stole mine. I just want to echo what she ended with. This is a moment where more people are paying attention to the inequities in landlord-tenant law and in our system as a whole for tenants. And so this is an opportunity not to lose to finally make some changes in that area.
Excellent. Lynette?
Yeah, I would say that Terry hit it on the nail, and I'm going to echo her sentiments that as we look at philanthropic support of our communities, we have to embed racial justice and equity as part of the strategic direction of our philanthropic giving for financial institutions and any service provider, quite frankly, and that has to happen.
And Michael?
Well, Bill, you know, I think we have an opportunity to take advantage of the political season. And I'm going to suggest that what's needed is political action. Any legislator or anyone that wants to represent us and is unable to connect the fact that affordable housing is economic development, is not aware of the impact of health and living conditions, then I would suggest maybe that's someone that you shouldn't support. So I say right now, political action is important. I'm going to make an effort as we go forward, as I go to meetings. I'm going to take notes. I want to see our representatives present, taking notes, understanding, feeling the vibe of what's going on in our communities today.
Man's paying attention. I may call him up later and say who he's voting for. Dave, the guy with all the money, what's your recommendation for all us folks?
Well, I think we have a really unprecedented opportunity right now to do some amazing things, especially when you look at the money we have now through the CARES Act versus the money that we typically receive to address a lot of these issues. We need units across Georgia. I know we've talked about Atlanta needing units, but this is a problem that we see across Georgia with our 14,000 housing choice vouchers under my division. And you know, we're ready to house people. We have the resources, but we just need units. We also need capacity in terms of structure to distribute these funds. So this may mean agencies, municipalities, partners stepping up into new roles and helping to administer and distribute these funds. Because really, we've got a kind of a narrow channel that has been used to distribute the funds, and now we have so many more funds, it's really going to require a lot more of a distribution network. So I think everybody needs to step up and think about what they could possibly do. And then collaboration. I know that's 3 things, but again, increasing collaboration amongst partners, philanthropic, government, and nonprofits.
You know, and in essence, what you're saying is we need each other, don't we?
We do.
And to Michael's point, anybody that wants my vote's going to have to answer that question about race and equity and sustainability. Thank you all for your leadership in this area and for joining us. And we did give you a lot of time to talk. Thanks for all your hard work. So let me shift now to kind of the final part of our conversation. We've heard from many voices today. And I've asked several people who I know well. I've asked Frank Fernandez from the Blank Foundation to come back, and for Megan Shannon Vilkovic, Vice President of Southeast Market Leader and Enterprise Community Partners, who's always front and center, to join me just for a short recap. So Megan, thanks for joining us. You've listened to the whole presentation today. What's your first impression of what we've heard? And what actionable item really jumps out to you?
Thanks, Bill. Well, first, I want to applaud all of our public and private partners who've been doing the great work on the ground. You know, this is such a critical time right now. And, you know, just hearing and listening to everybody, the theme of housing stability really strikes me. And, you know, to recap, you know, just hearing about looking at it through the short-term lens and the longer-term lens. Right now, the emergency assistance that we heard today is happening with great support from the state and the local government, as well as philanthropy. And, you know, we heard from Georgia Act, AVLF, Habitat, Star C, Mercy, and we know that there are others offering rental assistance programs. So the question around capacity and infrastructure, is this an opportunity for us to take action where is all of this information gathered? Is there one location that we could start, someone can start bringing together from the state down, so that way landlords, renters, include the judges and the court systems know where these resources exist, so everyone's informed in order to really maximize emergency assistance and eviction prevention. I would also add that recognizing on the short-term basis the advocacy, I did want to reinforce what Bambi had brought up earlier in the meeting regarding the Public Service Commission and the extension of the moratorium. Go to that site and find out who you can contact. I understand that meeting was tomorrow, if I heard Bambi correctly. So that's an immediate action right there on the extension of the moratorium on utility expenses. And I think we heard Margie talk about the 20% increase on utility costs to our low-income families based upon everyone being at home. But I did want to emphasize that, you know, is there an opportunity for someone or some platform to capture all of this, that we understand collectively what's happening and where we continue to need to advocate for additional dollars? The second was the longer term play. You know, right now, you know, we're in the crisis that we're in is just magnifying the need for us to produce and preserve affordable housing while we stabilize families' current situations. And the gaps that James spoke about is real. We're seeing it, we're experiencing it ourselves. And we need to continue to look at a both and approach. Frank talked about, you know, working with philanthropy and our public partners. House ATL on the Funders Collective has been doing that at a local level. We're thinking about how we advocate at the federal level, which will bring dollars down to the state and then down to the local. There'll be future packages, we hope. So the action there is to continue to advocate for additional affordable housing resources, both on the brick and mortar side, but also on the operation side. The voucher discussion today, very important. When we talk about systemic racism and racial equity, you know, an action is, you know, how do we address source of income and getting more vouchers out into the system? And lastly, I might add that, you know, your point about the Atlanta Apartment Association or organizations such, bringing them into this conversation and maximizing the influence and strength of those organizations. ULI is at the table, and obviously a very strong organization to support that as well. I think it's something we're going to have to also look at in partnership as well.
Thank you, Megan. And always thank you for your thought leadership and for all the work of Enterprise. Let me turn to Frank, basically with the same question. Kind of what have you heard and what feels urgent, Frank?
So what we've heard, I think, is that there are a lot of challenges, right? In terms of we have a greater need, a more acute need, and unfortunately decreasing resources, or at least temporarily decreased resources. And so that's a big challenge, right? And the quote you shared earlier about, you know, opportunity and crisis really sticks with me because, you know, I always try to find the silver lining in what's going on right now. We have these two concurrent crises happening. One is new, one has been going on, but we just all of a sudden put a spotlight on it. But I think both crises have created an opportunity in terms of people willing to look at things differently. And I think that is something we really need to latch onto in terms of the work that's happening. Because the good thing is that you had a lot of speakers just now talk about all the great things that are happening. And Megan really distilled that. And I think part of what our charge is to how do we accelerate and scale those efforts? And how do we think differently and act differently in terms of that? And to me, this opportunity that we have now because of this moment, and it's a curious thing to me, I've been talking to a lot of friends about why is it now that these police brutality things have hit when they've been hitting for so long, but they have. I can't answer that, but they have. And so we have to take advantage of that moment and really lift up that clear nexus in our conversation between housing and racial injustice. And how do we then accelerate their efforts that are already going on? I really like Lisa's Yeah, I wrote it down, and Lisa's like, we need to move from talk to action, from talk to meaningful change. And I think we have that opportunity, and folks are doing that. And I'll really emphasize, at least from the philanthropic perspective, the need for coordination, and how do we push that? Because I think we're seeing that not just within the philanthropic sector, but across sectors. And that is something that needs to not go away once people, this crisis kind of moves on or shifts to the next phase. It really needs to stay front and center.
And just a quick question for both of you. And the aftershock of 2008 is we had a housing crisis, a private equity bought thousands of Metro Atlanta homes at rock bottom prices, depriving thousands of households, mostly Black, people of color, of their equity. Is there any way to prevent that this time around? Because we're in a similar situation. How do we address that, Megan?
Bill, I'm sorry, I lost you. I couldn't hear part of that question.
I was really just trying to address at the last crisis in 2008, where private equity firms came in and bought everything up. People lost their equity, particularly people of color and poor folks. Are we going to see that again, or is there any way to prevent it?
Time will tell whether or not we're going to be facing similar situations to 10 years ago. But I do think it's an opportunity for us to take lessons learned from 10 years ago and proactively address us getting ahead of that. Is it an opportunity for us to put mechanisms, capacity, and resources together to be a part of the solution on securing folks staying in their homes now before folks start to come in and purchase these properties? We are concerned that there'll be multifamily troubled assets. And again, to your point, 10 years ago. So how do we equip our nonprofit, our mission-driven affordable housing partners to be ready to support the preservation of those properties? So those are some of the things we're looking at now.
Frank, any ideas there?
I think, vulture capitalism, which is what you're referring to, will happen again. I don't think we can, it's just the reality. I think the question is, are we better situated now than we were in 2008 to really mitigate its negative impacts? And I think so, and partially because there is such a focus now on this racial equity lens that I think it'll be very, very hard for folks to run rampant like it did back in 2008. And so I am hopeful in that regard, but also realistic in that we're not going to be able to completely prevent it, but hopefully we'll do a much better job than we did last time around. But I think it is, again, if we keep front and center that racial equity lens, we're going to have a much better shot of it.
Thank you both. I both put you on the spot to kind of, anybody listening could have this same reflection. If we were a smaller group, we were all together, we could get in small groups and have this conversation with each other, but we can't do that right now. I just want to thank everybody that we asked to be here today, both people on Facebook, but particularly our speakers. I gave them 5 minutes each. I usually give them 15 or 20, so it was a tough assignment. Amazingly, it's 11 o'clock and we're almost done. So thank you all the speakers who showed up. I also want to give a special thanks to ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission. That is our home. That is where you will find this material. You'll find a recording of this particular session. I want to thank ANDP, Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, a longtime partner, but particularly the time that they have given George Bergen, who really is, if we're going to celebrate today, this is George's victory that we pulled this off on time and everybody showed up. I would urge everybody listening to send George a personal note of thanks. He has put untold hours in this. And of course, the planning committee, and you can see that up on your screen. All these people are involved in bringing us here today, but particularly Bruce Gunner and Marissa Ghani. Marissa from ARC is our primary contact, who again, we have spent so many hours figuring out how we could come together in the middle of a pandemic. So thank you, Bruce and Marissa, and particularly George, and send George a note. He would like to hear from you. So let me just take just a moment for final thoughts. The one is, we didn't just get together today. We've been getting together for 30 years. So you could say Wow, we still have a lot of work to do. But the important thing is that we have relationships, we have trust, we have defined roles for each other so that we have a base to work from. And we have a base that is trusted by the larger community. So the essential message is that everyone on this call has both an opportunity and a responsibility to get personally involved. Everyone has a role and can do something in your circle of influence. Safe, affordable housing has everything to do with race and systemic racism. It has everything to do with creating better educational and health outcomes. Everything to do with being prepared and empowered to work, and most importantly, to create our sense of community, creating a home, a place that our kids can come back to and that we can raise our kids, a place that we feel safe and included. Yes, we've had setbacks with the pandemic and how has it affected the economy. But I would suggest it's an opportunity to reset our priorities, to address the systemic issues around public health and our right to health care, about our ability to vote, which was really in question yesterday in Georgia, our opportunity for upward mobility, and we're the lowest in the country, and for addressing violence and the relationship with our police. If we all had a home, there would be less violence. So we need to connect the dots, which we try to do at the forum. We need to work as a team and speak as one voice. And we need to be courageous, to be outrageous, to be the change that we want others to emulate. It's time to reimagine the community we want to live in and to do the hard work of making it happen. The work is to change the consciousness of people to understand our interconnectedness and the sacredness of life. So thank you all for tuning in today. We hope to come back more often with updates. I encourage you to go to the website at ARC and stay connected with us. And God bless everybody for the hard work that you're doing out there.